Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make books and courses for other potters who want to be more environmentally friendly in their pottery making. And that's what this podcast is all about. And I can't wait to get started. Let's go. In this episode, we're going to be talking about making pottery glazes. And when you're working with any powders in pottery, powdered rocks, powdered clays, ashes, you must always use an FFP3 face mask to protect your lungs. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to make an ash glaze. If you're a total beginner, if you've never made an ash glaze, even if you've never made any glazes at all, this episode is for you. I'm going to be telling you exactly how to make an ash glaze from the beginning to the end. You can do it. If you can make any kind of, recipe at all, if you've ever cooked anything, brought any ingredients together in some kind of semblance or recipe, you can make a glaze because it's exactly the same principle. Okay, so before we start the episode properly in terms of how to make an ash glaze, it's really important to say that when you're making any glazes, so I've probably done the this already, this at the beginning of the episode. I've got a little clip which is like, if you're making glazes, you must use an FFP3 face mask. But it is good to, let's just say it again. You really need an FFP3 face mask because the fine particles involved in making glazes, so for example, rocks, powdered clays, ash, you really don't want them going in your lungs because they can cause a condition called silicosis. And so you really need to protect your lungs with an FFP3 face mask. So this, for example, filters out the one I've got basically is kind of like loads of paper kind of folds, and it filters out all the fine particles so that I'm not breathing them in. And you need to make sure it's got a nice like tight fit around your nose and mouth to protect you properly, and so you're not breathing in any of the powders. So you need this at any stage of the glaze making process that's involving the powders. So for example, if you're sieving anything that's the powder, if you're mixing powders together, that can often create a sort of cloud of dust. But once you've made the glaze and it's a wet glaze, you don't have to wear this anymore because the powders have already incorporated into your glaze. So it's really just when you're working with the powdered aspects. Okay, so we've said the safety warning about the FFP3 face mask. You really, really must use it. So, okay, you're making an ash glaze. Where do you start? Okay. So the first thing to say about ash glazes is that they do really need to be fired up to stoneware temperatures, so that sometimes often you sometimes hear this referred to as a high fired glaze as well. And this is the reason for this is because ash glazes, they need those high temperatures of the kiln, high fired glazes. So it's like 1,260 degrees Celsius. Some of them are even fired up to 1,300 degrees Celsius. You need those high temperatures in order to melt the ash particles into a glaze. So you can't really make an earthenware ash fire glaze. Some recipes I've seen have this, but there'll be like maybe a specific type of ash used. If you're using, say, like hardwood ash, you need, yeah, from trees or something, you do need generally all the ashes that I've kind of been experimenting with, they all do need to be fired up to stoneware temperatures. So that's the first thing to say. You would need access to a kiln that can fire up to stoneware, because not all electric kilns can fire up to stoneware temperatures. So you need to make sure that the kiln you're using does fire up to stoneware, or the kiln that you have access to is going to be a stoneware firing. So, okay, step one is to get some ash. so, so this is say you can use any type of plant ash. Okay, so any plant can be made into an ash, which is that's the one of the most incredible things about ash glazing is that you can use any type of ash. So, if you wanted some ideas for different types of ash you can use, and also like what they look like, what the glazes look like, because different ashes will create different looking glazes depending on like loads of different factors, such as like the kind of the natural trace metal makeup of that ash. So it could be like the soil it's grown in, it could be like the growing conditions, like pollution. I've also heard can be a factor in terms of like what the glaze, what what particles are in the ash. It can be yeah, like the different sort of type of plant. So different plants naturally will have different trace metals and different mineral makeups in their ash. So if you want to have a look at like some different glazes and like different plants and what glaze they make, I've got a couple of books which I've done, which I've created, and you can buy them on the Oxford Clay website. If you wanted a paper copy, you can get them on Amazon as well. So the first one actually is that I wrote is pottery glazing with plant ash, and so that is both of these books just use one simple recipe. So that's 60 plant-based glazes from one simple recipe. Simple recipe. So that is like it's got loads and loads of different plants. In that book, it's got like different leaves, woods, different loads of different species of plants. And then the second book is a leaf ash glazing, a guide to sustainable pottery glazing with fallen leaves. So this is basically a book about making ash from leaves that have fallen naturally from plants, mostly trees. And then you can actually take those leaves, burn them, make them into an ash, and then you can use that ash in a pottery glaze. It just tells you exactly how to make it, and also like loads of different examples of different leaves: oak, magnolia, uh, lime, just to name a few. Common lime, not lime, the citrus fruit. So right, okay. So you can also get ash by getting some ash from, like, say, for example, someone who's using wood to in a wood burning stove. You can recycle the ash from a wood burning stove into a pottery glaze. You could get ash from like a bonfire that's maybe burned some kind of bits of garden waste or something, pruned branches. You can get ash from there. So a really good source is like if you recycle ash that would like normally be thrown away, but you can also make your own ash from loads of different plants and stuff. So that's it. To say that yeah, you can get ash from anywhere, but a really good thing to do is to try and get ash from like a single source. So for example, say someone, well, it doesn't have to be the same plant, but say for example someone is burning, they're burning hardwood makes a really really good pottery glaze. So that's kind of like it could be like oak or something. Those woods that are like, they're known as hardwoods, they are, some people burn them in a wood burning stove. That's what I use. I basically recycle ash that people have used in wood burning stoves. I've got some kind people that give me their ash that they've used to heat their homes, and and I know that they burn hardwood, and hardwood ash makes a really beautiful pottery glaze. It's sort of like a lovely, quite often like transparent glaze. Sometimes you get like little flat sort of blue mist, a kind of bluey white mist sometimes on the pottery glaze as well. They make really, really interesting, makes a really interesting glaze. So ash glazes are incredible, and they generally always make really interesting looking glazes. I'm just interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on how to make a stoneware pottery glaze. So, if you've never made a glaze before, or if you make loads of glazes and you just want a recipe, this guide is for you. It tells you everything you need to know, and it's available via the link in the show notes. Let's get on with the episode. Okay, so you've got your ash. Got it from a bonfire, you made your own from leaves, or someone gave you some ash from their wood burning stove. What do you do with it then? Okay, so this is the difference between making an ash glaze and another pottery glaze. The difference is that you have to process the ash before you start making the glaze. Okay, so again, this is an FFP3 face mask moment because when you're what you need to do with this ash is you need to sieve it. Okay, so you absolutely need to be protecting your lungs at this point. You could also use goggles if you don't want the ash going in your eyes. Ash is caustic. You don't really want ash on your skin, so you do want to be taking some precautions, like protect yourself from ash. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be sieving it through ideally 100 mesh size sieve. So 100 mesh size is quite small, and this does take quite a long time. So what I do is I basically get my 100 mesh size sieve. I just got it from the internet. It's a metal sieve, and I take a spatula, which you know use for cooking, and I just brush the ash, like gently brush the ash, like through the sieve into a suitable container, like a bowl or something. And it does take a while. So usually it's like put on a podcast or music, and I'm just like sieving that ash for ages and ages. But it's really worth doing because if you don't sieve ash, you can quite often get like little bits of grit, little bits of sort of stone, which has come from the soil and stuff, and it will make a kind of rough pottery glaze. So 100 mesh size sieve I found is the optimum size in terms of getting those little particles out, and also not taking loads of time. Because if you sieved it through anything finer, it would probably take even more time. Okay, so some people wash their ash. I don't wash my ash. So washing ash basically just involves like soaking that sieved ash, or you could even do it before you sieve it. You're rinsing it in a bucket, you're pouring out the water, you're rinsing it again, then you're drying that ash. I actually don't do that. So really, it's a long process, and some people say that they find it makes a better glaze because it sort of makes the glaze more even in terms of the coloration of it. Some people say it makes a less good glaze because it can wash out some of the useful kind of like beautiful aspects of the glaze and the fluxes and stuff. So I actually don't wash my ash. Yeah, you'll see sometimes in pottery books like wash your ash, and I don't, and it's fine. With a caveat that sometimes, like marine, if you're making ash from like marine plants, say like seaweeds or something, they will need washing because they've got like salts in, and they just don't make nice glazes unless they're washed. But if you're making any ash from like just a normal terrestrial plant, then you don't need to. I personally have found you don't need to wash it. So, okay, so there we go. We've got our sieved ash. Okay, so this is amazing. We've got our ash. It's an ingredient that we can now use in our pottery glaze. Okay, so the next thing is we need a recipe. Okay, so we need an ash glazing recipe. Now, there are so many ash glazing recipes out there, loads of them. They'll use ash, they'll use other ingredients like rocks, maybe sometimes clays, in different proportions. But if you wanted a really simple ash glazing recipe that I found is one of the best I've ever tested. It's absolutely brilliant. It's Cornish stone, 40 parts, ash, 40 parts. So that's whatever ash you're using. So the sieved ash, 40 parts, and then quartz, powdered quartz, 20 parts. Okay, so that recipe makes a beautiful glaze, and it's really, really simple. If you didn't have Cornish stone, you can substitute Cornish stone for like a feldspar rock. I've been doing some testing with that, and I found like it works almost as well. It's slightly the craze is like slightly, ever so slightly more, but yeah, if you didn't have Cornish stone, you can substitute it for feldspar. So if you're thinking, where do I get these things from? These rocks, basically, you can buy them from pottery suppliers. So pottery suppliers will be able to sell you these as like powdered rocks. Again, when you're working with them, you must use an FFP3 face mask. But they'll send them to you, say maybe in like a container or a bag. And then what you're doing next is you're going to just weigh out those ingredients according to the parts in that recipe. So if you wanted to make, for example, like a test, so what I do is I basically convert it to grams. So if you think about it, you can think about it as parts, or you think about it as like a percentage. Say, for example, we're talking about like the 40 parts ash or 40% ash. So you can just calculate however much glaze you want. Say, for example, you want to make just a little glaze test of like 100 grams or something, just see how it goes. Like, then it would be 40 grams of ash, 40 grams of Cornish stone, and then 20 grams of quartz. So in glaze recipes, the water is never specified, but we're going to be adding water to those ingredients next. So that's the next thing to say is that just if you want to make more glaze, you're just scaling it up. Again, you're doing percentage or parts. Um, you can add like oxides if you wanted to add coloring oxides to ash glazes. They do work really, really well actually because of the fluxes in the ash. So Yeah, I've actually got a book which you can get on the Oxford Clay website, about colour, eco-conscious pottery colour. And in that book, I use different colouring oxides which I've made from recycled metals. So it's like iron and copper. So it's verdigris, which I've made from copper, and just rust. And I've been experimenting with adding those to different base glaze recipes, and like ash. A lot of them are ash glaze recipes, and they make really beautiful glazes. So, yeah, if you wanted to add any oxides to your glaze, you add those on top of the base glaze recipe. So, if, say for example, you're making a little glaze test, and the recipe says like 1% verdigris, you would add 1 gram of verdigris to that glaze test if you're doing 100 grams of glaze. So, say for example, you want to make more glaze, you want to make like a kilogram of glaze, then you would scale that up to 400 grams of ash and four of sieved ash, 400 grams of Cornish stone, and 200 grams of quartz. So that's how glaze recipes work in terms of the parts. Okay, so yeah, the next stage. So we've weighed everything out. We've put it. They're all powders. We're all in our face mask. We're just using kitchen scales to weigh it out. Weigh the ingredients out separately in case you need to take any bits out of that bowl again. You know, in case you accidentally put too much in. They're really difficult to separate. It's why a lot of glaze ingredients are basically like white powders. They're quite difficult, and obviously if they've mixed together, that you wouldn't be able to take out the bits if you accidentally added too much to the bowl. So I weigh out them separately, and then I add them all together at the end in terms of like, yeah, to a bucket. So you want a suitable glaze making vessel, ideally with a lid. So a bucket is a great idea, a lidded bucket. You can get those from, again, from like pottery suppliers. You can use any kind of, anything with a lid. Say, for example, the Tupperware pot, if you're making a little bit of glaze, you could use a jar. Um, so anything with a lid, because that just stops the glaze from drying out. Okay, so the next thing you're doing is you're going to add water. So, like I just said, just a second ago, that water is never really specified in terms of like how much to add to a pottery glaze, and that's because I think that the like people who make glaze recipes, they don't necessarily know how thin you want the glaze or how thick you want it, or your you just might need a different amount of water than they specify if they did specify it in a recipe. But generally, with ash glazes, you want to make it into the consistency of sort of single cream, but kind of like on the thick side, because I found that ash glazes actually work better when they're a little bit thicker. So, again, you can experiment with this. You can make your glaze, and then test it, and then see, oh, that was a bit thin. Maybe the ash glaze needs to be a little bit thicker. You'll be able to tell if it's too thin because it might go rough with ash glazes. So quite often on the rims of my pots, I do get a little rough surface if it hasn't had enough glaze on there. That's how to tell it's a bit thin, or that can also be a sign of underfiring actually as well. But so if you haven't added enough water to your glaze, you can obviously just add more. But if you think you might have added too much water, just wait for that glaze to settle. It won't take too long, and then you can just scoop, especially with ash glazes, they settle really, really quickly, and then you can just scoop the water off the top, and then you're back to the glaze at the consistency that you want. Okay, so you've got your glaze, you've weighed out all the ingredients, you've added the water, it's in a bucket. The next thing you need to do is sieve the glaze again. So this might seem like really laborious. Like, why am I sieving this glaze again? I've already sieved the ash. It's taken me absolutely ages, but it really is worth doing because it makes sure that all the ingredients are properly dispersed in that glaze. So especially ingredients like Cornish stone, they can often stay in like little tiny lumps and stuff. If you're adding any kind of oxide to the glaze, sieving it is really important because it will really disperse that oxide like throughout the glaze. So yeah, sieving it again. Again, the same thing with a 100 mesh size sieve. It'd probably be too difficult to sieve an ash glaze with a smaller mesh size sieve than 100. That's probably the lowest, the minimum you can go in terms of like hole size. And again, just use your spatula. You're just sieving it. You're just pushing the glaze through. You can pour it in with a jug or something, pushing it through into your container again. Just making sure you only need to sieve it once, just through the sieve all the way through. sieve it once, and your glaze is ready to use. So the thing with ash glazes, like I said, they do settle really quickly. So before you use it, just make sure you give it a little stir every time you're dipping a pot in. It's a really good idea just to give it a stir to kind of make sure it's all mixed, and then dip your pot in. And next to pot, just give it a little stir again, and then dip it again, because they do settle really really quickly. But yeah, so before you use your ash glaze, stir it really really well, um, to make sure all the ingredients are kind of incorporated. They quite often get like a big sort of sludge at the bottom, so just make sure, yeah, just make sure you're stirring it every, each time you're using it. And then a really good idea is labeling your bucket that you've got the glaze in. Again, like I was saying about lidded, make sure it's lidded, because it will just stop your glaze from drying out. You don't have to have a lid, but it's a much easier thing to do than like to be adding water to your glaze every single time, mixing it all up again. So yeah, really good idea to keep it in a lidded container. Yeah, and then labeling it with like whatever glaze you've made. So you've made a beautiful glaze from like ivy leaves, which does make an amazing fallen ivy leaves does make an amazing glaze. Yeah, just label it, and and there you go, you've made your glaze. So, yeah, so make sure you're using your FFP3 face mask throughout the time when you're using the powders. And then a really good thing to say about, important thing to say about ash glazing when they're wet glazes is that you don't need your FFP3 face mask anymore, because all the powders are being incorporated into the glaze. But ash glazes, like I said at the beginning, are caustic. So you don't really want to be getting it on your hands. So if you normally dip your pot in with your hands, you could try glazing tongs instead, or you could wear gloves and to dip your pot in, or you could try pouring the glaze over the top of your pot. But you don't really want sustained contact with ash and your hands, because it can can hurt your skin. Yeah, and you could use safety goggles if you wanted like an added precaution against like splashes going in your eye or something. That would probably be a good idea as well. So that's how to make an ash glaze. And like I said, it needs to be fired to stoneware temperatures, but that's it. So the only difference to making an ash glaze to making, any other pottery glaze, is that you just need to process the ash first. So you need to get a source of ash, and then you just need to sieve it, and then it's ready to go in terms of your ingredient. And so another important thing to say actually is that quite often when you're looking for an ash glaze recipe, if you're a bit, thinking, where do I get, ash glaze recipes from? There's loads of books on ash glazing. You can use the recipe in this episode. I'll put it in the show notes as well. That's a really good recipe. Um, you can get loads of different recipes, from different sort of pottery books. They'll probably say wood ash in the glaze recipe, but you can just substitute the word wood for ash with any kind of plant ash. So, if you wanted to make like to try out some an ash glaze made from leaves, if a recipe says wood ash, you can just use leaf ash. That's absolutely fine. So don't think you have to use wood ash if it says wood ash. Lots of older glaze recipes specify wood ash. That's just because that's what people were kind of generally using then. But you can use leaf ash. You can use offcuts, prunings. You don't have to use like wood ash. um, yeah, so if you wanted, yeah, the recipe, like I said, or there's, yeah, the same recipe is in the books on ash glazing available on the Oxford Clay website. Another really good source of recipes, ash glaze recipes, is a website called glazy.org. So that's when potters will just like have their recipe, upload it, and then you can see what it looks like. That's actually where I found that my tried and tested ash glaze recipe, which I use with like all my pottery, the one I said in this episode. It's such a good recipe. I actually found that on glazy.org. Yeah, it's so nice. Potters just sharing recipes, and then like you can see what they look like and stuff. They often have photos of what it looks like, which is it's really nice. It's really good website, free to use. You can search by keywords. I searched for ash and found that recipe. Yeah. Oh well, thank you so much for joining me. If you wanted to make an ash glaze, you absolutely can. You definitely can do it. It's a really fun area of pottery. the world is your oyster in terms of like the creativity that you can make from ash glazes and all the different incredible glazes that you can make with like one recipe just by switching the type of ash you use, by sort of testing different, eco-friendly oxides made from recycled metal. Oh, there's so many amazing glazes that you can make from ash glazing. So it's a really amazing area of pottery. And thank you so much for joining me on this episode, me talking about ash glazing again, which I love. And yeah, wishing you very happy potting until the next episode. And I will see you soon. Goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me on that episode. And if you want to find out more about eco friendly pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. Can't wait to see you there.